Good morning, and my thanks to Alan for inviting me to speak to you today. Let me start by introducing myself and my background. As Alan said, my name's Penny Roche, and I'm an English teacher at Landmark International School just outside of Cambridge. We're a small school, and our students come both from around the world and from our local area. A Landmark education aims to provide a human-centered approach to learning, ensuring that each individual is nurtured to be self-directed, creative thinkers that contribute to making their communities and the world around them a better place. As an authorized international baccalaureate world school, we support their mission to develop inquiring, knowledgeable, and caring young people who help to create a better and more peaceful world through intercultural understanding and respect. High ideals indeed. In addition to my role as an English teacher, I'm also the designated safeguarding lead, with responsibility for different areas of students' safety and well-being, including their online safety. And I'm also the secondary years coordinator, with responsibility for overseeing our curriculum. I think I said that we're a small school and we all take on several roles. It's within this context, and as a result of my various roles, that my colleagues and I have been having conversations around how we help our students to assess the barrage of information that they are exposed to on a daily basis. How do we support them to be self-directed, creative thinkers? And how do we help them to remain positive and forward-thinking in a world that can feel really difficult to navigate for them? Mis and disinformation are the words on everybody's lips, and the very concept seems to evoke a strong reaction. Amongst teachers, the reaction is often one of concern and lack of confidence as to whether they have the tools to cope with the speed at which the students' experiences change and grow. The online landscape is changing at a rapid pace, and colleagues feel out of step and unable to respond effectively, while knowing that it is vitally important to respond. The way that students access the online world tends to be very different to how we as adults access it, and we can't rely solely on our own experiences to guide us. As the designated safeguarding lead, my colleagues ask me, how do we talk to students about some of the social media influences that they are following? What do we do when they talk in misogynistic ways or espouse extremist views? How do we react when they tell us with absolute certainty that the earth is flat? Often, the response to a difficult conversation is to shut it down out of concern over saying the right thing. My response to my colleagues is to be curious, create a connection. Tell me about what you've heard. What does it mean to you? Then to gently suggest alternatives, to ask, do you trust your sources? Have you verified them? We know as teachers that it's only by building connections with our students that we're able to have these conversations at all. Students listen when we do. Building trusted relationships helps them to have somewhere to turn when they are uncertain of what to do. And we can do that. We can build those relationships. However, in our daily conversations that revolve around disinformation, we're struggling to know how to support our students. Our response at Landmark has been on several fronts. Firstly, we've been developing our academic integrity policy, within which is embedded the need to teach media literacy. And it struck us that this also gave us the opportunity to develop a research skills continuum, which goes from reception, 5 years old, to Key Stage 4, 14 to 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. Anecdotally, I'd read a post from an acquaintance after a recent election. Deep in the comments, someone had derisively wondered what was going to come next in education, teaching disinformation to kindergarten students. It set me thinking, and I realized why I felt this missed the mark on so many levels. Teachers, and indeed parents, have been teaching 4- and 5-year-olds about mis and disinformation since the beginning of time, just without that specific terminology. I want you to imagine the following scenario. You're in the playground and you're on duty. A child approaches. Miss, Billy pushed Sarah. Did you see it when it happened? Sarah said it happened. We all know that there's lots to unpack here. What actually happened? Did Billy push Sarah? Did Billy trip? Did Sarah push Billy first? Is something else altogether going on? It is the bread and butter of every early years teacher to siphon out the truth of everyday events in the playground. Even at such a young age, we ask our students to tell the truth, to think about where their information comes from, and to consider that there may be different perspectives through which to view a situation. Students at this age are absolutely capable of understanding and beginning to understand these concepts. Obviously, and with an understanding of different stages of child development, it takes time for these ideas to take hold, and we introduce them in an age-appropriate manner. Unpacking events in the playground may seem unconnected to the grave realities that we are discussing here in this conference. However, there is a clear progression from the early years and how information is treated by young children to the older student who is trying to navigate the vast world of information in the palm of their hands. With the research skills continuum that we've been working on, we wanted students to develop strategies on how to assess information in order to grow their understanding. Some of the skills that we wanted students to learn included, amongst others, attribution and citation, understanding bias, and differentiating between reliable and unreliable sources. These skills and others are developed from 5 to 16 years old at our school in an age-appropriate manner. We're currently teaching a unit on digital citizenship to the Year 5-6 cohort, who are 10 years old, thinking about digital footprints, cyberbullying, and responsible use of devices. This is an inquiry-led unit, and students are fully engaged in exploring these concepts. Our next approach was to look at explicitly teaching media literacy. As an English teacher, much of my day-to-day is spent teaching students to think about how they are being positioned to respond to a text. And for the purposes of the classroom, a text can be anything where meaning is conveyed: a poem, a novel, a news article, TikTok, or post, for example. And it's not limited to written words. This critical literacy approach allows students to work with teachers to examine what messages are being conveyed by a text and to consider how they might want to respond. It's also important to consider the trustworthiness of the text, using strategies to verify its authenticity. Crucially, it is not about telling students what to think, but rather about teaching them how to think, how to evaluate the information that is being poured into them. This complements a critical thinking approach that is embraced by the IB and many educational institutions. We decided to build on the training that our librarian had done with Bellingcat and the Student View, who had teamed up to do a media literacy course, which is sadly no longer available, by designing a unit using the Bellingcat resources as a guide and bringing in other resources to support the learning. We wanted to see how effective the specific teaching of media literacy was in helping students to have agency in determining the veracity of the information they are consuming. So we started by asking the students how confident they were in their ability to spot mis- or disinformation, where they got their news from, and how reliable they think their sources are. Many students felt that they could identify it absolutely and understood the difference between the two, although a third of students were not at all confident, and it's worth noting that just because they feel confident doesn't mean that they actually are able to do it. Student felt more confidence in information that came from news sources and strongly felt that social media was not reliable, interestingly. We realized from the pre-unit questionnaire that the students thought that they knew quite a lot about the subject, and so an approach that consolidated and built on that knowledge was deemed to be the most effective pathway. The unit looked at different news sources and our understanding of their reliability, thinking about media ownership, political leaning, and targeted audience. We considered concepts encapsulated by Stuart Hall's reception theory, that media is encoded by producers with particular meanings that we as consumers decode. We looked at a move from passive to active consumption, We moved on to think about definitions for mis- and disinformation, thinking about where we might encounter it and how we could recognize it. Students considered the effects of algorithms on their feeds, played games to test their ability to discern disinformation, and researched case studies using Bellingcat's resources. At the end of the unit, we asked students to reflect on their learning, and there was a clear increase in confidence and understanding. Students felt that they had strategies to help them to decide whether a piece of information was correct or not, and to be more cautious as to how they approached it. What we discovered from the process of running the trial is that our experience at a local one is one that is mirrored at a national level, unsurprisingly. While the unit produced useful conversations and learning, it's not enough by itself, nor are we as educators currently equipped to navigate the vast array of information that's available. It's not that we're not capable, it's that we're time poor. Our role as educators is to help students navigate this landscape with the tools to think critically about the information that they're consuming. However, we're not the only stakeholders in this and can't do it alone. There is a clear case for the explicit teaching of media literacy, and this is borne out by the research, particularly and including that carried out by the UK government, Ofcom, the Pears Foundation, the London School of Economics and Political Science, and the English and Media Centre, amongst others. Generally speaking, while there is, to my best knowledge, no specific directive to the education sector to deliver media literacy education, it is absolutely implied that teachers will deliver it, and it is certainly necessary. In 2023, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology published a report entitled Cross-Sectoral Challenges to Media Literacy, which highlighted the obstacles to knowing what is already being done, where the gaps are, and how to avoid reinventing the wheel. The report identified the need for a strategic approach. It's worth taking a moment here to reflect that the current situation is asking students to self-manage a task which is a mammoth challenge. It's a David and Goliath scenario where giant corporations have a vested interest in making it very hard for students who are still growing developmentally to turn away from their screens. However, given the realities that we face, it makes sense to equip them with knowledge, with skills, with the tools to face the challenges that they do. My talk's entitled A Case Study, but as I researched, I realized that our case study, our unit, was a very small part of a much bigger picture. My experience and my research have led me to the same conclusions. High-quality media literacy is essential for the whole community. It's generally assumed that this will be delivered by teachers. Teachers are at the front line of supporting students who are navigating the online information landscape, and trusted relationships are key. Teachers need training and resources to have the skills to address the situation and even just to facilitate conversations. Students need to have the tools and strategies to effectively triage the information that they are being bombarded with. There is a need for a media literacy strategy with detailed statutory guidance for schools, which is current, well-funded, and brings together cross-sector stakeholders to support educators. When we talk with students about how the online landscape works, there are many factors to consider. But one of the most important, in my opinion, is that the narrative should not be one of fear. This is the world in which we live. And knowing that access to information is a powerful force for social change, equality, and creativity brings with it a responsibility to help students to access information safely in order to become self-directed, creative thinkers. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions. There's one.
I can't believe you're giving me the first one here. I have a question that's more philosophical. And I want to start with the absolute assumption that I fully support media literacy. I think it's a really, really good thing. But I would convey a conversation that I have with my favorite sparring partners. And I would ask, what gives any of us the right to assume what we should teach others about what's right? So I think to try to express it somewhat differently, is there a question about whether they're going to get the right answer? My own answer to that would be maybe teaching the scientific method in such a way that you teach how to invalidate one's own assumptions, whether to examine, question, validate, invalidate, and replace one's own assumptions. The idea being that if I'm willing to teach you something that would invalidate what I would teach you, then I'm not threatened by that. So maybe that would be the right thing. So I would ask you two of these. How do you earn the right to teach what's right? And then also, how do you ensure that you're doing it in a way that you get a good end result and not just conformity? So again, it's a harder philosophical question.
I think actually it's a really fascinating question, and it underpins much of educational kind of ideology. And there are some people who, within education, who think that you need to be a guru in front of the students and to say, this is what I'm telling you, you need to absorb it, right? It's very passive. From my perspective, and certainly from an IB perspective, our approach is more of an inquiry-led. So we might pose a question, and my role is more as a facilitator and a guide. My job is not to tell students what to think, ever. So I don't need to come from a position of thinking, I know what's right, I know where you need to be. What I can do is pose a question. What I can do is give them the tools to find out what they think about a situation. And I think with the online situation, it's really important. The social media world, that's their space. It's not my space. The English classroom, with its canon of novels and literature and poetry, that is my space. And it tends to be one that they come into, and I try to facilitate as much as possible that they can participate in. But in the end, somebody else has decided that this poem is great and worthy of study, right? The social media world is their space. So the minute I start to impose my understanding of it on them, they're gone. They're shut down. What have I possibly got to offer them? Nothing, really, other than a framework for them to assess what it is that they're seeing and reading. So I guess I'm not here to tell them what's right or wrong. I'm here to suggest ways of thinking. How can you assess this? Because there might be somebody who feels something quite strongly about one thing and another thing about something else. I need to give them frameworks with which to assess that information. But I do certainly think that if something is a lie, something is absolutely not true, I want them to be able to see that. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's fine, thank you. Interesting more discussion.
Sure.
Hi, Penny. Thank you so much for a really wonderful presentation. My name is Juliana von Rapid-Bismarck. I run a media literacy organization called Lie Detectors, which sends journalists into schools like yours to work with children on fostering critical thinking and media literacy. And what we see more and more is that, particularly since the corona pandemic, teachers are increasingly aware that this is something they need to talk to about with all of their children, regardless of subject area. They're very willing, they really want to talk about it, but they have severe constraints. They tell us they don't have time, they don't get incentives, and they're afraid to broach a topic that can very quickly become risky, and even physically risky for teachers, as we know. So my question to you is, what do you do to fit in this kind of teaching in a very busy curriculum that's very constrained by Ofsted demands? And how do you make your teachers feel empowered to talk about this in a safe way? Thank you.
Thank you. That is also an excellent question, and it's extremely tricky. And in fact, it speaks slightly to your question as well, in terms of people are really worried about what they say and how what they say will be perceived. They're worried about the backlash. They're worried about, which is why often conversations are shut down. I have anecdotally, talking to a colleague at the English and Media Centre, a colleague of hers who was being observed and was talking about representations of women in different media. And she was observed by the head and was told, you can't teach that. And she said, but it's on the curriculum, so I do have to teach it. And he said, well, in that case, I want you to script it. so that there are no kind of ways for you and then no conversations. So the issue there is that then if we enter into that world where we can only have scripted conversations, and we can only be worried about saying exactly what is right, then how do we have authentic, useful conversations with our students who are wanting to ask us questions about things? It's really tricky, and I think it's about training, it's about funding, it's about, at a governmental level, being given the space and recognizing that it's absolutely fundamental for our students going through, for our democracy, in terms of how they think about the information that they're receiving. But that's not going to happen at a school level. It has to happen at a much larger level. Teachers are really keen to be involved in it, but they want guidance.